Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Keith Giffen Day. We're taking a look at the Legion of Superheroes, issue number 290, August 1982. Picked this up on one of my recent comic hauls. You'd know about that if you checked out the video. It's on there. Yeah, check it out if you haven't. And basically what this is kind of a classic storyline that involves Giffen. For some strange reason, I thought he was the writer, but he is not. Not that it took away from my enjoyment from the issue for multiple reasons. This is a little bit, a good decade, I guess, before my time when I really got into comic books. So it's a different kind of style and period that I'm not that familiar with. And when going through these issues, I was kind of thinking of like, this is the stuff that guys like Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane were probably looking at in their young age before wanting to move into actually being professional artists. There's kind of a slight DC house style. We've talked about how Giffen can adapt and change his style. He certainly does it here too, even though this is a step back, right? So this would, if I had reviewed all the Keith Giffen stuff chronologically, this would have come in after the Defenders issues that I did, right? Which were very... I've talked about and reviewed those as well. Very Kirby influenced, right? Very obvious. A lot of Steranko as well too. There's still going to be some of that here, more so in kind of the newish villain designs. I'll explain that as we go through the book, how that works into the storyline. But with those designs that are kind of Kirby-ish and the backgrounds and stuff and the technology, still that way, but it's almost like he went from, doing that Kirby thing was kind of a Marvel house style, now he's kind of doing a DC kind of house style, which is kind of different from that, at least with the figures and stuff. So I'll talk about that as we go through the book as well. That's kind of my feelings on it, just real quick. This is a classic storyline involving Darkseid. I'm just going to spoil it right away, but knowing that, you can kind of see the build-up that they did, which is pretty interesting storyline-wise. And I'll talk about that as well, going through the book. As for the cover here, I'm not sure exactly who he's hinting at here, because there's a bunch of, it could be a few of the bunch of new villains that appear in this issue and an old one in a different form, but it's almost like the symbolism of all of them kind of wrapped into one or something, I guess is how I describe it. I'm not quite sure. Striking cover. I think it looks pretty cool. Very 80s. Like this is, when I'm reading this, I just, I was born in 1980, so I would have been like a year and a half, 2 years old when this came out. I have no sense of this from when it came out, but my impressions obviously just, it reminds me a lot of the early 80s and the just kind of pre-He-Man kind of stuff. And I see where, the stuff that I was into in my earliest memories was probably influenced a little bit by some of this stuff. Anyways, really going far into that. So the cover, cool, striking. I like the whole kind of negative white here on the cover. Definitely would make it stand out. And that is it for that. Let's crack her open and have a look inside. So a nice splash page to start us off. So Paul Levitz, the writer, or Levitz, Keith Giffen, and Larry Malstead are the artists. So I'm assuming pencils and inks. And John Costanza, letterer, Carl Gafford, the colorist. So right away with the splash shot, like I said, that Kirby Steranko influence is kind of apparent in the backgrounds, but right away you'll notice a slight difference in the rendering, right, of, a little bit more feathering maybe than he was doing at Marvel. I don't know, maybe it's just an impression I get, but it just has more of a George Perez kind of DC style, post Neil Adams kind of inking, I guess is how I describe it. But all of these shapes down here, right, and the insane perspective and stuff, very Kirby. All the technology down here. And for the early 80s, I mean, the colors are pretty decent. They certainly give off that early 80s vibe, right? So does the smell of the book. So yeah, we do come into kind of the middle of a sequential, monthly comic. So there's repercussions from the last issue, right? But this is the beginning of a new storyline. So, as a jumping on point, it's got that kind of... dialogue that kind of clues you in along the way as you're reading it, as to what you kind of need to know about the main kind of characters with the Legion, excuse me. Yeah, is it the Legion? Yeah, Legion of Superheroes. I'm so unfamiliar with these guys that, I just, I don't even know their name. Do you want to mention real quick? I don't know if we see it on this page. Yeah, we do. Okay, right here. So this is meant to be Superboy. So at this point, I guess in DC continuity, Superboy is, hanging in the future with the Legion, right? That's basically what I've been able to surmise. But I mean, you could definitely confuse that for literally Superman, right? It doesn't really look like Superboy. It's kind of strange. and all the way throughout. He's, to me, just he comes off as in no way Superboy, and much more so as Superman. So it's odd because they call him Superboy the whole way through. So this museum has kind of been trashed since this character is kind of the, how do they describe it, the warden or whatever, the curator of the museum, excuse me. I should read more of what's in the actual phylactery here, and that would clue you in. So yeah, this guy here I thought was hilarious because, I mean, is that not Doctor Strange, or an analog Doctor Strange, right? He's just got poofier hair. Even the gloves down here is kind of a dead giveaway, right? The eye of Agamotto just kind of being obscured by his hands there. So that was a fun little thing. Analog Doctor Strange mentions the wand that he hadn't left out in the regular collection in the museum, right? And that's he's guessing that's why the museum was trashed. They were looking for that. It holds immense power, right? It says over elements in their natural state. As he's saying that, you know, these kind of cool Kirby squiggles come out, but not kind of blacked out and inked in as they usually would be with Kirby, but just screen toned a little bit, which is cool. Nice kind of graphic panel. And the character, how strange, is it truly growing darker suddenly as these kind of squiggles move in, which I think is nice, just art-wise, to kind of foreshadow the coming of this guy. I'll just call him Dark Dude for now. They're given a name a little bit later, but there's a few of them. So he's the first one, kind of bursting onto the scene, and, you know, I guess having been the one most likely to destroy the museum, stuck around to see if maybe the wand would be revealed at some point, and of course it is. But of course, battle ensues. Legionnaires aren't going to let him off that easy. Some cool kind of technology being used here by, you know, I don't know exactly their powers. I think this guy has magnetic powers. Not even sure what their names are. Trash is Superboy real quick. And just interesting stuff going on with the vintage kind of 80s coloring. 1982 is still like, there's still a bit of 70s left in the early 80s, if I can put it that way, if that makes sense to anyone out there. I think it should, right? And then, you know, the neon colored 80s, which start probably around 1984, 85, are kind of, you know, a little bit different than this. Not so tinged with 70s, you know, aesthetic or coloring or anything. So I feel like the color choices here are still kind of very 70s, and I like it. I like these color holds here, this Kirby crackle, the dark silhouette on the blue all the way throughout, pretty much consistently at the top at least, and down here a fairly dark blue that works well. Yeah, something about this page, I really like the coloring. So we're going to have a look at the secondary Legionnaire characters who aren't really involved in the main storyline here. And again, another example of just, you know, slightly more subdued. It's almost like he's, I mean, I'm figuring on purpose doing this, right? Like DC Comics, maybe not so much today, but even there's a slight difference, I think, in just generally how you approach the aesthetics of pages there, right? So there's always a slight kind of Silver Age feel to the DC stuff, and, you know, they never tilt the horizon. That's kind of a big one. Jack Kirby does it all the time, but the DC guys just were really, you know, head-on kind of Norman Rockwell kind of straight shooter kind of imagery, right? So it's almost like, I mean, I'm pretty sure Giffen understands that, and that's why, you know, this is obviously a more mundane kind of sequence of them chatting about and whatever, but there's definitely a difference, as I said, from his Marvel storytelling that I could see here. And he's, you know, he definitely understands there's a certain kind of Marvel school to it, at least at this time, 70s, early 80s, and there's a definite kind of DC school. This guy's funny, Timberwolf, right? Because he's always been kind of known as almost like the prototype for Wolverine, kind of like, you know, some of the inspiration for Wolverine came from Timberwolf. And like, there's nothing wolfy about him, I guess, other than he has an open shirt and lots of chest hair. So I guess that's how they're trying to get it across. But there's just, I find his look very subdued to kind of be like, hey, this guy's like, you know, the original Wolverine or something. Pretty clean cut for that, you know. Here we get a nice establishing shot of London in the future, right? Very Kirby-esque in as far as the point of view, and also just all the kind of little details for the city below. All the shapes and stuff are definitely Kirby shapes, and shapes Kirby would use. So they fly down to the tower here, which holds another artifact. Bunch of weird characters. Some guy wearing a Hawkman uniform is there for some reason. So the future, I guess, is filled with lots of weird creatures and aliens from other planets. It makes sense. We've made contact, right? I guess past Star Trek or something. This panel here is very kind of original and cool in as far as the treatment of the silhouette and the feathering out here. And, you know, the colors being smart enough to leave that little bit of white to kind of finish off the silhouette. You kind of missed it on the face here, right? But I think this one's pretty complete here. But you get the idea, and it looks really good. And it's very different. Not something I'm used to seeing in any period of comics, really. And with that kind of splash of just blue in the back with no holding line, that's pretty cool. Very different. Again, still... you know, a foot in the 70s and slightly psychedelic, which I always love. Yeah, so the sci-fi here is, like I said, still 1 foot in the 70s and 1 foot in the 80s as far as the look and the aesthetic, right? Someone like this character, I feel, is much more 80s. But then Invisible Lad here, he's got kind of 70s vibe for sure. This sequence I thought was just kind of funny, where it's that, you know, typical, it almost looks like a Kirby sequence where the character kind of, you know, is about to take off, coming towards you, and then you get a nice close-up of his face usually, but this is Invisible Lad, right? So Invisible Kid, excuse me. So he starts kind of going invisible in the legs here. It slowly moves up his body here and on his contour line, kind of weird choices. So almost looks like he's got boobs here or something. And then just the eyes. I just thought this was kind of, in a weird way, like hilarious in a graphic sense too. I think he kind of was having fun with this for sure. And it does work. I mean, he gets across what he's trying to get across. He's, you know, as he moves towards us, he's getting invisible. That's great, but just, I thought that was a funny sequence. Could just be me. So here's the second Darkling character, right? Who I didn't point it out when the first one came in when he left, but I'll make it more obvious here because it happens with each of them as they're introduced. So another character, definitely like just the Kirby crackle and the shading, and you know, it's 100% a Kirby inspiration for sure. And coming to get another artifact, if I'm not mistaken, because it's London. This is the sword Excalibur, and able to retrieve it. There's another interesting kind of psychedelia effect. Very cool. I love that stuff. And the fact that it's in a negative panel, right? Like no actual panel lines around it. Very cool. So yeah, eventually he gets the sword again and jumps to a portal, right, that appears, very reminiscent of the boom tubes, right? So all the way through there are hints, obviously, that we're talking about Darkseid, if you know a little bit about it, and I do, because I'm a huge fan of the New Gods and Jack Kirby and all that Fourth World stuff from the 70s. But that certainly informs this story, you know. In hindsight, I know all that stuff, but if I was reading it, obviously there'd be some sort of build-up and surprise to it, which, like I said, even though it's not Keith Giffen writing, I was pleasantly surprised by this book, and you know how it was building the story pretty interestingly, and it was a fun read just overall. There seems to be a lot of text, but you can get through it pretty quickly. So on this page, we're back to, you know, kind of like when I reviewed the Eric Larson books. I guess he probably got some ideas from, you know, old 70s, 80s comics as well, right? Before he became a professional, always establishing kind of a B storyline, a C storyline, right? And that's kind of what's going on here. We've got the main storyline with the dark characters attacking and taking the artifacts. And then we're back to Legionnaire Hall where, you know, we've got a storyline involving these guys here. Storyline involved these guys that I'm not going to get too much into. The main storyline is kind of what we're here, but you know, a regular reader has got a lot of chew on, I guess, if he's reading this regularly and just jumping in with this issue. It helps inform a little bit of, you know, who the Legion are and what they're doing, at least for me, who's a complete neophyte and knows not much about these guys. So okay, so the Darkling characters that we've seen before are here, and then we see that there are more back here, right? And then their leader, you know, it's just weird because he's got, you know, this kind of design that we can see here, and the face is kind of just, I don't know how to explain it, just a full power emanation, right? And definitely not Darkseid, but right away, as soon as I saw this, I'm like, it has to be him, right? And as he acquires the artifacts and gathers power, right? Here we see a shot of his face. You can't just naturally assume that's Darkseid, but already this is definitely reminding me of Darkseid a little bit more. The brow is pretty pronounced, right? Even though it's all like in silhouette. So he's hinting at it, but this could be anyone still, right? Cleverness of the artist. So again, just more chatting here. We'll move through those pages pretty quickly. Chatting about the artifacts, and here we're back at, again, at Legion headquarters, and you know what's going on with them. So this third Darkling character gets introduced. That's a great silhouette panel right there. And again, once more, my argument that some of this harkens back more to like kind of 70s aesthetic. That's definitely what I'm getting there. A similar kind of effect on this panel here. Love that stuff. And then kind of a quick look. The coloring's a bit dark, but if you can see the character's face, and they all just have like kind of weird, off-putting, gross faces. All kind of, again, still a little bit of that Kirby inspiration in there, and the Kirby monsters. So again, the Kirby influence in the backgrounds and in the design of the characters here, the villains showing up. So they think they've kind of pulled it off and got the orb away from her. Got her under control here. Great use of Kirby Crackle. That's definitely a Kirby pose in the negative space there. Another kind of cool, you know, overall psychedelic kind of panel. And then boom, here we got a boom tube. And out flies this guy with, you know, this kind of weird contraption, almost like a harness, right? And if you know anything about the New Gods and Darkseid and his son Orion, you know, that was kind of my first thought when I saw him here. You know, could this be Orion in some weird mismatched, you know, burned up form or something? You know, just like, obviously he's another Darkling, so but I assume it's Orion. He's got Orion's symbol on his head there. This was on his helmet, I'm pretty sure. So Keith Giffen definitely hinting at that, I think, in the visuals. And he's able to wrest away the orb and fly back out of the boom tube, back where he came from, right up here. And the Lady Darkling gets taken down by the Legion and taken in as a prisoner. More B&C story, so there's some elections going on there amongst the Legionnaires, and there's, you know, a few characters vying for that position, that power. These are two pretty good pages. Just to real quick talk about the layouts of this comic book as well. Even though, like I said, it's almost like he's doing kind of a Silver Agey head-on kind of DC style with the art overall. There's still, you know, instances where he doesn't, right? And he changes it up. Like this has a tilted angle all of a sudden, right? And makes the page a little more interesting, more dynamic, because just a lot of talking going on, not that much action. But he's got a lot of long kind of vertical panels, which gives it kind of a Euro vibe. And I think also in American comics, once the mainstream kind of artists who were coming up in the 70s discovered the European artists, they started incorporating some of that stuff. You know, Kirby went very cosmic, and then after that came the guys like, you know, Jim Starlin, George Perez, and those guys. I'm pretty sure we're looking at European comics by that point. So there's something about, even though it's a DC book, something a little more interesting and exciting about the layouts, and how even like in a slightly calm pedestrian, I don't want to say pedestrian scene, but where not much is happening, still keep the book looking interesting and you wanting to read on. The storytelling is impeccable, I will say this. The aesthetic works for me sometimes not so much, but as far as, you know, an enjoyable comic that I want to read throughout, it's a super easy read, super clear to understand what's going on. Storytelling is like absolutely impeccable. And then boom, we've got our Darkling coming back on his astral harness. I'll just say it. I'm going to assume it's Orion, maybe, because also at this point we see a little bit more maybe of the texture and reveal of the character's face, and it's really starting to look like Darkseid a lot. And as this character with the astral harness delivers the orb, he calls him my son, right? So if that's Darkseid, then that would have to be Orion, right? So what's going on here? This has actually got me intrigued storyline-wise. This panel is great. The power shall be mine. It's very He-Man, I feel. And just like the whole treatment of it here with this little bit of negative space for his form and his face. I think this might be, the coloring's a bit weird, so it might be hard to pick up on the camera, but there's a face here and the power emanation, very Kirby, of course. Just looks, again, it's still got that 70s vibe that I love. Great, interesting looking color holds too for kind of the cosmic-y situation, what's going on here. And so at this point, our secret villain has absorbed yet another artifact, and can't wait to find out what happens next issue. This is actually a really good read. Not disappointed that Giffen's not the writer, just surprised, and gotta say I really enjoyed that one overall. Alright guys, that's my review of the Legion of Superheroes issue number 290. If you're still out there watching and you're subscribed, thank you so much. I really do appreciate the support. And if you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you, and it really helps the channel out, and it helps us grow, helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are. So everyone out there, thanks again for watching, and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like! Subscribe! Like! Subscribe!
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KingComics.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.